Jesus, salve for the eyes. Do you know that you have a blind spot? Not the one in your car, but right in front of you, in your field of vision. When I learned of this blind spot 40 years ago in a college psychology textbook, I didn't believe it. The book had a diagram with instructions that proved that indeed I do have a blind spot. I followed the instructions, holding the page with a spot and a cross on it right in front of me, and sure enough, when the dot reached a certain point, it disappeared. Google it. We all have a blind spot where the nerves come together in the eye. Humanity has a spiritual blind spot, a blind spot that Jesus has come to cure. Jesus, salve for the eyes. We all have a spiritual blind spot. The story of the man born blind reveals to us our spiritual blind spot. We are born not seeing the world as it truly is. The coronavirus may have recently given us an indication of our spiritual blind spot. Did you run out and buy an unreasonable amount of anything these last few weeks? Spiritual blindness can manifest as a fear of scarcity. A second way spiritual blindness can be manifesting in this crisis is seeing the coronavirus as punishment from God. Now, most of us are too sophisticated to fall into this trap, but I assure you such blame is going around. William Blake, reflecting on spiritual blindness, wrote, "If the eyes of perception were cleansed, we would see things as they are, infinite." Blake translated this truth into imagery at the beginning of the poem, Auguries of Innocence. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower, holding infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Blake is trying to help us understand that we can see the spiritual in the material. We can perceive the infinite God in the smallest bit of matter, and we can sense the eternal God in the unfolding of time. This is more than believing in God. It is a consciousness of God moving through creation, looking at reality and not seeing scarcity, but rather seeing infinity. Spiritual seeing does not come easily. In the gospel story of the man born blind, Jesus quickly cures the man's physical blindness, but his spiritual sight emerges more slowly. Step by step, he comes to a deeper awareness of who Jesus is and finally becomes aware of what Jesus is doing in the world. In the story, Jesus is doing what God has been doing from the very beginning of time. He brings light out of darkness. From the first moment of creation until now, this has been the work of God. The man born blind, when he gains his spiritual sight, realizes that Jesus is the one who, from the beginning of time, has been bringing light out of darkness. That's Jesus' very essence. He is the light of the world. That Jesus' ministry is to complete creation by activating the latent but underdeveloped spiritual sight of the human person, Jesus is opening our spiritual eyes to see and to respond to the divine. For most of us, spiritual seeing develops over time. It is not a big bang experience that suddenly strikes us. It is more like the arrival of spring. Day by day, the temperature slowly rises. The snow melts. The first shoots of flowers break through the earth. The song of birds returns. Trees begin to bud. Spring slowly creeps in to replace the grip of winter. We ponder the gospel day by day. We have an ongoing dialogue with Christ. We celebrate the sacraments. The awareness of his light creeps into our souls and into our consciousness. We begin to see the world as it really is, infinite. Once we grasp that it is clear that God is not punishing the world with the coronavirus, but through this crisis, we may come to see what is really important. We do not need to hoard goods, but our neighbors may need a helping hand. To see the world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Jesus, salve for the eyes.